might help with that a little bit. As a non-planning board member of the subcommittee, I didn't realize until last week actually that the real decision point seems to be the land use plan itself, and that the options we're looking at are, as I understand it now, are the placeholders until the land use plan is completed. And so these options may stay in place, they may not, but that the land use plan, is that
That's
correct?
not entirely true. The land use plan is a vision. It's a plan, it is not a regulation. Whereas the zoning ordinance itself is the regulation. And the zoning ordinance has to be consistent with the land use plan. And that's one of the reasons why the land use plan is going to be revised, because the last time it was done was 14 or 15 or 16 years ago, and Chatham County has changed since then. So the land use plan itself is not a regulation. Is that true, Hillary?
It's a policy document, but it does guide ordinance changes.
Yes. And the ordinances are in fact the regulation.
Right, but I think what Taney may be getting to is from that conversation at the Ag Advisory Board is that we have a good understanding of the inventory challenges, topography, you name it, that could guide some decisions for altering zoning at that point.
Exactly.
And of course, a lot of public input through that process.
Right, and particularly addressing the point of the public input is that the land use plan is the point at which there's really going to be a comprehensive effort to get public input. And so, once the land use plan is put together, that may or may not make whatever decisions are made with these options look better or worse. And so they might be changed as a result of the land use plan process.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, I don't know if that clarifies what you're saying, but it depends on how you look at it. There's an interim between now and when the land use plan is completed, maybe a year and a half or 2 years from now.
It sounds like you're speaking in favor of Bill's recommendation.
Well, I think I would agree with him in that I was confused and about what the interim actually was. And I think now I'm getting close to being clear on it, but I can see where that term is confusing to people that haven't been involved in the process.
I'm going to comment on the term interim, maybe you can correct or clarify this, but from an earlier meeting, I seem to recall that if it's interim, it's got a natural expiration date, at which point it terminates automatically.
No, you can't do that with zoning. You would have to go through the public process, statutory requirements to undo or Galin zone or whatever. There's no sunsetting on a zoning.
Okay, and what's the point of declaring it as an interim zoning then? How is that different than?
The expectation is that
You've
when
got
the
to the
land
heart
use
of the
plan
matter.
is adopted, this will all be revisited. That's the expectation, but it's not an absolute requirement.
That's the point I'm trying to
Yeah.
make. In terms of zoning, there is no such thing as interim zoning. You zone it,
I hear what
and
you're
that's
saying.
it.
And I think that's what
Yeah.
has a lot of people upset.
So,
So are you speaking in favor of Bill's proposal?
Yeah, I think there's a recognition that this is a plan that's is kind of a stopgap to go through to the land use plan is in place, at which point it will have to be revisited and refined. And I think on several occasions we've kind of talked to that effect, even in a roundabout way.
Yeah, the point is, I don't want to mislead people and think, oh, this land next to me is going to be zoned R1, but it's only going to last for a year, you know, I mean, that's not going to be the case. You either leave it the way it is or you rezone it, and that's what happens. Now, of course, you can change zoning, but it's not an interim thing.
so is everyone in basic agreement with that? It sounds like you've made a convincing argument. Is that true?
Well, why are we exactly considering interim or whatever you want to call it, zoning at the moment? What's driving, besides the fact that the commissioners have asked us to look at it, what's driving this?
You know, there's multiple things driving it. One is that every county that surrounds us is zoned, so we're at risk from getting things that other counties don't want.
Why?
That's one,
Okay.
right? The fact that we're the second fastest growing county in the state out of 100 counties is certainly requires a need to look at zoning, because that's when you have more land use decisions being made. And it's reasonable to have a plan, and it's reasonable to have zoning in those fast-growing areas. Obviously, the fastest-growing area is in the eastern part, and it's much slower growing in the western part, and that's why we've had different options that would have far more lax zoning in the western part of the county than the eastern part. We've also had some issues with gun ranges and coal ash and other things like that that have, you know, raised some concerns for folks about not having zoning and not having control over, you know, those kind of issues that have upset many of the residents in the county. So, you know, those are the basic reasons, and I'm sure there's more.
Well, can we touch on two of the two of the favorites that you seem to have? One of them seems to be the gun range. It came up in the,
It's not a favorite that I have.
well, it's been brought up
That's-
several times.
no, This is the first time, actually, I've brought it up.
Okay, but it's been brought up several
I
times.
brought up the issue of rapid growth.
Okay, you brought up, let's talk about coal ash then. How is zoning going to affect coal ash deposits in this county?
And we have, I think, 12 clay pits
Right.
in Chatham County.
And as we
And-
learned yesterday, the commissioners are negotiating a deal with Duke
Yeah.
to pay for using that.
For that one,
That is correct.
that they're not negotiating anything with the other 12.
Okay, and how would zoning be able to affect that? It's a state issue.
Well, not necessarily. It is a state issue with this last decree. It's not necessarily a state issue for all those coal ash pits or all those clay pits.
Well, I think that the clay pit that this coal ash deposit is in is zoned industrial, which is why it was a use by right to use it as a coal ash pit. If other areas where there are clay pits are zoned residential, then they would have to come before county for approval. Is that not true?
Let me add a little clarification. The coal ash combustion, the act preempts local zoning,
So it doesn't
has the
carry-
effect of preempting any kind of local control or anything that would prohibit or stall coal ash and the use of storing coal ash on site in clay pits. So we were preempted from a zoning standpoint.
So we can basically say the coal ash argument is a red herring and zoning would not have an effect on it.
There's still some debate amongst, I guess, the state debate on that particular component, but it's pretty clear that if you have anything that prohibits or has the effect of prohibiting coal ash in your ordinance, you have to go to the mining commission board at the state level, and they can evaluate or repeal parts of the ordinance if they so choose and make the findings.
Okay.
Coal ash, how we're preempted, and if it was located in another part of the county, would have to go through
The
the
zoning would
process.
exclude
Wait.
coal ash pit.
It's the way the legislation is set up, coal ash reclamation is part of the mining permit. So we can regulate mining through zoning, which would therefore regulate coal ash placement. And we can still, even with the site we've got here in the county, with the Green Meadows site in Brickhaven, they still have to comply with all of our zoning requirements. So there was a conditional use permit that was approved in 2007 on portions of that property that have building setbacks, undisturbed buffers. They have to comply with all of those requirements. So it's not,
So that's.
we can't treat coal ash as a separate use in our list of uses because the way the legislation is set up, it is tied to mining, but we can regulate mining.
Okay.
So what's happened in Brickhaven is Green Meadows or Chara purchased a mining operation.
So in that sense, it would, having to comply with our zoning ordinance.
They have to comply with.
So that's a
they comply
positive
with-
for the neighbors, for the community,
They
that's
do.
a positive.
They have to comply with lighting, you know, all that stuff, building setbacks, riparian buffers.
But those are ordinances?
This is zoning ordinance,
Zoning
zoning ordinance requirements.
One comment I have based on what you were just saying, it speaks to some of the questions that Wayne was asking. It's like currently without anything, pretty much any industry can go into the unzoned areas and by right plop down there. Whereas even if we went to the open use, that there would be at least be certain industries that would be incumbent upon them to state, okay, this is why this is a good location and show that they're meeting with the regulations. And it would also give the neighboring impacted people some say in the matter.
That sounds, if that's the description of open use, you're correct. Right now, we do have underlying regulations watershed that do limit uses in certain areas of the county. But generally, the unzoned parts of the county, we do not regulate.